Yo guys, what is going on? JPS back for another video, and today we're going to be watching German political parties explained. And just last week I made a video on German political parties with the hope to get a more in-depth overview of what the different German political parties are and what they stand for. But the video I watched didn't really go into too much detail, and in the comments of that video a lot of you guys recommended that I watch this video. So that's exactly where we are. For those of you who say don't pay attention or listen to the comments, I don't do a good enough job sometimes, but this time I did. So hopefully this is going to be a good video that goes into depth on German political parties. I'm really excited for it because I still don't have much knowledge. The last video didn't do too much for me. And yeah, so let's get right into it. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, and let's go.
The political parties in Germany. Who are they? What do they do? And what do people think of them? Well, let's find out. So until there are dozens of parties in Germany, but for national politics we can focus on just 6. 7 if you're a pedantic know-it-all. And how do we know these 6 are the important ones? Well, they're the only ones with seats in the national parliament. The other ones are either too small to get in or too regional to matter. I'm sorry, Magdeburger Gartenpartei, we're here for the big guys. Just like most democracies on this planet, German politics were once dominated by 2 major parties, one of the broad, more progressive center-left and one of the broad, more conservative center-right. But as we shall see, the whole power dynamic has changed quite a bit, especially in recent years when minor parties have become much more relevant and powerful. There will be time codes for all of these, but for now let's start with
Die Sozialdemokratische Partei Deutschlands, SPD.
This is the supposedly big party of the centre-left. It's the oldest party in Germany, emerging from socialist movements of the 1860s before moderating into what it is today. If you're familiar with any of the many Labour parties around the world, like the UK one or the New Zealand one or the Dutch Partij van de Arbeid, you probably have a good idea of the SPD's basic profile, which is being the party of solidarity. A kind of solidarity that's expressed by a strong welfare state focusing on the working class as well as overall social and economic justice. Accordingly, their main focus has always been on the blue-collar worker, you know, your coal miner, metal worker, cleaner, hands-on kind of jobs. But these days they're really struggling to keep that aura of the grand old workers' party alive. You might be getting different explanations for why that is, depending on if you're talking to a more left-wing social democrat or a more pragmatic moderate. Those 2 wings of the party tend to clash from time to time. But either way, just know that the SPD was the big left party for decades. On to their right-wing rival.
Die Christlich-Demokratische Union, CDU.
The CDU is a juggernaut in German politics. Most of our chancellors have been CDU, which makes them the sort of default power party, but just like the SPD, their shine's starting to wear off a little. When foreigners hear the name Christian Democratic Union, they often think that it's a sort of hardline religious group, which, let me be clear, it's definitely not. No, they're just sort of culturally Christian, right? So moderately conservative, sort of the more regressive, cautious force, in line with many of the right-wing parties across the continent. Traditionally, they're made up of social Christians, economic liberals, and conservatives. And no, I didn't just come up with these categories. No, the party quite ostentatiously advertises with these 3 pillars of the union. But you won't be wrong just calling them the Conservative Party of Germany. As such, they're most concerned with things like public safety, tradition, frugal spending, things like that. Oh, and overall they're quite moderate, which has won them many elections, but just like with the SPD, there's a growing desire from the more ideological wing of the party to become more unapologetically conservative again. Okay, so far so easy, right? 2 parties.
I gotta say, so far this is a really, really good video. Like, he's going into some serious depth here, and I'm actually understanding what these parties are about.
Along the standard Western left-right divide. And the thing is, we would have almost been stuck with that 2-party system if it weren't for
Die Freie Demokratische Partei,
Thank God for that.
FDP.
Yeah, this little guy has always managed to squeeze in.
FDP.
The word free should have already given away what the Free Democrats stand for. Freedom. Or if you want to be fancy, we could also call it liberalism. How exactly that freedom is defined may vary between the different factions of the party. You know, you've got your social liberals, economic liberals, and national liberals, which is what we call this. You've got your social liberals.
Look at this. No step. Oh, they have the, okay. I see. This video's fire,
and
man.
National liberals, which is what we call the sort of right-wing libertarian kind of liberal. But really, these differences are minuscule. The important bit is they all agree that the individual should be at the center of all policy. That makes them both very open and progressive in a kind of we shouldn't tell other people how to live stance, as well as very capitalist. So they're all about lower taxes, decreasing bureaucracy, and competition. If you are into that sort of politics, chances are that you're from a sort of upper middle class to upper class household. Maybe you're a big shot business person or self-employed, or you founded one of these trendy hipster startups. Or at least that's the sort of person that usually votes for the FDP. Well, that and farmers. Now, I already mentioned that the FDP was sort of the reason we didn't end up with a two-party system, and I mean that quite literally. There were a few decades when we only had three parties in parliament, the two big ones and then the FDP as the small third option. But don't think small equals unimportant. No, that was actually a really comfortable situation for the FDP to be in, because they alone could choose who would rule the country. I mean, obviously not alone, but the success of the FDP always made it so that neither of the big parties could get an outright majority.
I love
That's
that.
how the Liberals earned the rather unflattering title of the Kingmaker, who's only there to break the tie. But these days they're really trying to get away from that image by highlighting their tech savviness, for example.
Bündnis 90, die Grünen.
The Greens.
Next up are the Greens, who came in much later. Like, we're talking the 1980s here. The Greens are actually quite different from all of the other parties, since they grew out of these protest movements from the late 60s to late 70s, who advocated for all sorts of issues like women's rights, anti-war, anti-nuclear power, and obviously environmentalism. And they kept that revolutionary spirit going even after they upgraded to a proper party. Like, look at them! Look how uncomfortable he is. All those high-class politicians suddenly sitting next to literal hippies knitting in parliament. Now, obviously the old parties weren't happy with those green weirdos. I bet they don't even shower, they'd say. But then came a time in which the Liberals firmly placed themselves at the right hand of the Conservatives. Suddenly the Labour Party was without a partner.
They needed someone to look to. Wow.
I think you can see where this is going. Hey, psst, hey, green guy. I didn't mean what I said about you and not showering. You actually smell quite nice.
You're actually a nice hippie. Join me.
And thus came to be what's been considered kind of the natural state of German politics ever since, a red-green alliance as counterweight against a liberal-conservative one. Since then, the Greens have undergone a sometimes messy evolution, with lots of infighting between their more left fundamentalist wing, called the Fundis, and their more moderate, sometimes even conservative wing, the Realos. However, that division seems to disappear a little, since the Greens have grown so much in the recent years. Like, they've become massively popular.
Really?
At least for the time being. They're still a very explicitly feminist party and fairly interventionist economically, but they try to soften the edges a bit to seem more appealing to a wider audience. It's 1989. David Hasselhoff has just torn down the wall. East and West will finally reunite. What a major historical event! You'd expect the end of the Cold War to be a pretty big political earthquake, wouldn't you? One that's surely gonna leave its mark on the German party system. But
Definitely.
remarkably, it wasn't. The few parties that did emerge from the New East were quickly sucked up by their already existing Western counterparts. Just like basically everything about the East. The only exception is Die Linke, which is the Eastern Party. So you might already be aware that East Germany was a dictatorship for 40 years. It was ruled in this very repressive way by one single party, the Socialist Unity Party, or SED. But here's the thing, when the wall fell and East Germany finally got some proper democracy, that party was not outlawed. No, it got to continue in the United Germany, but now reduced from a singular, unopposed regime to just one of many contenders in the democratic process. One with minimal success. Turns out having led a dictatorship doesn't actually sound good on your resume. So in order to rebrand itself, the SED quickly changed its name to PDS, the Party of Democratic Socialism. The old Western parties were of course very much opposed to this new party, like even more so than against the Greens. But by this time the PDS had already assumed a new role, that of the niche interest party for Eastern Germans. Turns out many people from the East were nostalgic, or at least sympathetic to the SED. So even though the Eastern Bloc had were nostalgic, or at least sympathetic to the...
It wasn't all bad. Someone tell me this joke right here. Someone explain that in the comments. This is hilarious though. I'm loving this video. This guy has a really good sense of humor, and he's being educational at the same time. And I love how there's like this historical time frame that kind of forms the basis of this video, and he's not just explaining the parties, but rather giving like some historical presence to the video, which I love. This is crazy.
The
man.
SED.
I'm
So
learning
even
so
though
much.
the Eastern Bloc had collapsed, socialism was very much still on the table. A little detour. What's the difference between socialism and social democracy? In many countries, the word socialism can mean a whole bunch of things, from public healthcare to abolishing property. And if the word social democracy is even used, it's usually understood to be on the same spectrum as socialism. But I think most Germans will probably cringe at that, since historically we understand those two terms to be different categories. Now, I know there are a whole bunch of scientific definitions for those words, but I think conventional wisdom in Germany has it that socialism tries to overcome capitalism, whereas social democracy tries to rein in its destructive powers. Again, you might call this just a matter of degree, but here we perceive those two parties to be on different slots of the political spectrum. One of them with considerably more historical baggage. Just to finish this off, it's
I'm gonna say it now. Actually, I think this ties into my reaction initially to the idea of like socialism in Germany and how it's so widely accepted, just the term on its own, and why that creates so much skepticism, especially from Americans when they hear that Germans, some of Germans' political ideas, is because like socialism or socialists, just the term socialist in the United States has been weaponized to a point of no return, and it's so integrated with communism. Like some people will hear socialism and they'll just think communism right away. It's like boom. In reality, it's not really what it is. I feel like in Germany, based off of that definition he gave, it's kind of like a softened version of that, and much less extreme than what is the socialism that is portrayed in the United States. So I think that might like help you guys a lot with understanding why Americans react so like explicitly when they hear the word socialism or hear Germans talking politics, because it's so new to us. There's just a lot of difference in the way those terms are interpreted between countries. So that's really interesting.
It's actually quite hard for me to see what kinds of factions there are within Die Linke. I mean, obviously there are all sorts of flavors of different doctrinaire socialist beliefs, with most of them belonging to a more settled professional class. But then you do get the occasional nutcase who's still under surveillance of the German intelligence service. So for many people it's kind of a mixed bag. Despite that, there's been a lot of talk recently about including Die Linke into the center-left alliance together with the SPD and the Greens. The argument is that we're now 30 years removed from unification, and that the old guard has surely given way for a new generation of socialists to emerge who have nothing to do with the old dictatorship. They just want to advocate for better wages and fighting poverty, but that's still up for debate. Die Linke is still associated with these radical economic proposals, as well as a weird pro-Russia stance. So, we'll see.
Which is probably why people maintain that skepticism about letting them like unify with those three parties, because of the outliers in the group that he just mentioned. That makes sense.
Okay, last one.
I guess they're outliers.
Controversial.
I hope
Die Alternative für Deutschland.
so. What?
AfD.
The AfD was founded in 2013 by a bunch of
AfD.
right-wing conservatives who mainly campaigned on getting rid of the euro and returning to Germany's old national currency. Boring? Yes. But no, believe it or not, that was actually quite shocking. Our political parties share a large consensus, so they're all broadly for the European Union, they're all broadly for the same economic system, and they all broadly agree that climate change is really bad. And now the AfD came in to, shake things up a bit. Back then in 2013, I thought the AfD might become the sort of mirror image of Die Linke, where they occupy the same kind of spot in our political scene, just on the opposite side. One where they criticize the moderate center from a more ideological, populist perspective. That didn't happen. Instead, what happened was that the AfD was quickly taken over by far-right extremists with overt ties to neo-Nazi organizations with just despicably racist, homophobic, revisionist beliefs. The supposedly conservative side of the party has for the most part been on board with this partnership, although some have left out of protest, including the original founder of the party, which can never...
Founder left. The
you can
founder
imagine
left.
their positions. They stylize themselves as a sort of fighters against SJW culture, they're hard on immigrants, they are the only rescue for a dying Germany. And that would be the good right. Like, maybe the conservatives are too mild. Maybe we did need a more staunchly right-wing party in parliament. But there's this vicious anti-democratic tendency that permeates the entire party, which is just sad. And yeah, in case you're wondering, the other parties have erected a giant wall between themselves and the AfD, deeming them basically untouchable. Will the AfD actually gain power? Like, maybe someday, but not now. Like, if the Greens or Die Linke have taught us anything, then that with more moderation, you will gain power in Germany. If you don't moderate, you're out. Dun dun dun. I'm sorry, I didn't exactly end this on a high note, did I? I still hope you had fun, and hopefully you now understand a little bit more about sort of German politics. Just thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.
All right, wow, that was a really good video. One thing I wanted to say before I give these final thoughts is that this video was heavily recommended and requested and stated as a great video from so many different people in the comments. So it's not like I just watched one video where the source video wasn't reviewed. Like, this is what a lot of people were proponents of me watching. So therefore, I feel like that gives it even a higher ground for me to be able to take it as, obviously nothing's ever going to be objective, but more facts than lies, I guess, so to speak. I'm really intrigued on the AfD party. I'm really intrigued about that and how that maintains any position, because based off of what I've heard from German politics and German political parties off this video, Germany is very very progressive. Like, all these parties, even the far right parties, like, that's not, or even the right party, the right wing party, like moderate right, that's not moderate right, at least what I knew moderate right to be. So I feel like this video has really changed the way I look at political ideologies and like an ideological scale of left and right and what that really means and how that harbors so many different definitions of where you are. Because before, I had just thought of, the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States, the right-wingers and the left-wingers of the United States, the divide of that. But I didn't realize that, like, in Germany, the political, like, battleground is just so much more different. And I think a lot more in line with what I would want out of a political system, not only with the wider range of parties and larger number of parties, but also with just the general consensus that all these parties are under, and kind of maybe unspoken, but still agreement that they have to move the country forward as a whole. And, how they, certain values, which are really important, like staying in the European Union, they all hold those, you know what I mean? Rather than parties just thinking differently about huge things like that, like we have in the United States. Parties will think differently about, monumentous decisions of our, like, nation's progress. And it's like, why can't we just have people just be a little bit more grounded and level-headed? Instead, they get wrapped up in these things, and it's all perpetrated by the news. And, you have Fox and CNN, which are opposite sides, and they're always making people watch the TV and think, oh, those people believe this, screw those people. It just makes you hate the other side more and more. So easy to get wrapped into it. And I don't blame anyone for doing that, because our country is just so bad when it comes to politics. But this is something that it's just so different. And I think I'm a much bigger fan of Germany's political system when compared to what I'm dealing with right now in the United States. So yeah, that's what I got to say, guys. Really changed my complete mind on what I was thinking about Germany, and I got a lot to think about. I got a lot to digest here. This is a lot coming at me. So let me know what you guys thought about the video. Hit the like button, hit subscribe. If you have other videos you'd like for me to watch, please drop them in the comments. This is a great video for all those of you who suggested it. I really do appreciate you. And with that being said, guys, I'm going to catch you all in the next one.